What was it like to be a wealthy ancient human? Picture this. You wake up before sunrise, and the first thing you feel is silk against your skin. Not the rough wool most people sleep in. Not animal hide. Silk. Imported from somewhere so far away that most people in your city have never even heard of the place it came from. Someone is already in your room, not because they broke in, because they live here, and their entire job is to be awake before you are. They have already warmed a basin of water. They have already laid out your clothes. They are waiting quietly for your eyes to open. You stretch. The ceiling above you is painted, not smeared with ash and soot like the ceiling above your neighbor, but covered in scenes of gods, battles, hunting parties, feasts. Artists spent months on it. You paid them in silver. Outside, through a window framed in carved stone, you can hear the city starting to breathe. Bakers shouting, animals moving through alleyways, the smell of bread, smoke, dung, river water. But in here, it smells like cedar oil and flowers. This was life at the top in the ancient world, and it was stranger, more theatrical, more anxious, and more human than almost anything you've ever imagined. Here's what most people get wrong about ancient wealth. They picture it as kings and crowns sitting on thrones, untouchable and serene. Gold everywhere. Power unquestioned. Life as one long, comfortable feast. The reality was far more complicated and far more interesting. Wealthy ancient humans did not just spend money. They performed it. Every choice they made, from the food on their table to the sandals on their feet, was a calculated broadcast to every other human around them. Wealth in the ancient world was less about comfort and more about visibility. If no one could see it, it barely counted, and the pressure that came with that? Crushing. Being rich in ancient Mesopotamia, Egypt, Rome, or China meant living inside an elaborate, exhausting, never-ending production where you were simultaneously the star, the director, and the set designer. The moment you let the performance slip, the moment a rival showed up with a bigger banquet or a taller column on his house, the whole thing could start to unravel. The ancient wealthy were not relaxing at the top of society. They were sprinting to stay there. Let's step inside the life of a wealthy Roman businessman in the 1st century AD. Call him Marcus. He owns 3 apartment buildings, a bakery, a small fleet of ships that move grain between Sicily and the port at Ostia, and a country estate outside the city where he goes when Rome becomes too loud. His morning begins with something called the salutatio. Every morning, before he has eaten, before he has bathed, before he has done anything he has bathed, before he has done anything for himself, a crowd assembles outside his door. Not a crowd of friends, a crowd of clients. Lower-ranking Romans who depend on Marcus for favors, jobs, legal support, letters of recommendation, small loans, and connections. They have been standing outside since before dawn. Some of them walked an hour to get there. Marcus opens his doors, and the performance begins. He moves through the crowd slowly. He remembers names, or at least he pretends to. He listens to requests. He makes small promises. He hands out small amounts of money to the poorest ones, a practice called the sportula, essentially a daily welfare payment from a rich man to the people orbiting him. This is not generosity. This is a strategy. In Rome, your power was measured in people. The more clients who showed up at your door, the more other powerful men respected you. A wealthy Roman with no clients was like a modern influencer with no followers. The number told everyone else how seriously to take you. So Marcus stands there in his best toga, performing patience and magnanimity for an hour or two every morning, before he has even had breakfast. Today, we'd call it managing your personal brand. Now here's where it gets genuinely strange. Marcus does not cook his own food. He has slaves for that. He does not clean his house. Slaves. He does not carry messages across the city. Slaves. But here's what most people don't realize. The wealthiest Romans didn't just have slaves for labor, they had slaves for status display. A rich Roman hosting a dinner party might have a slave stand behind every single guest. Not to do anything in particular, just to stand there. One person, one slave. The math was simple. More slaves in the room meant more wealth visible in the room. Some wealthy Romans traveled through the city carried in a litter, a kind of enclosed chair borne on the shoulders of 4 or more men, specifically so they would never have to touch the ground. This was not primarily about convenience. Rome had streets. Marcus had legs. The litter was theater. Being carried meant you were important enough that your feet should not have to make contact with ordinary pavement where ordinary people walked. If you have enough servants, apparently even gravity becomes optional. In ancient Egypt, the wealthiest citizens went a step further. They wore wigs, long, elaborate wigs made from human hair, sometimes mixed with plant fiber, dyed and styled in ways that took hours to arrange. Underneath, they often shaved their heads completely, because a wig gave you total control over your appearance in a way that actual hair never could. You could change your look for different occasions. You could make your wig bigger, taller, more decorated than your rivals. Hair, for the Egyptian elite, had become a technology and the perfume. The ancient wealthy were obsessed with smell, because smell was invisible status. You could not always see how rich someone was from across a crowded marketplace, but you could smell them. Egyptian nobles rubbed themselves with scented fats and resins. Roman elites spent fortunes on imported spices used purely for fragrance. In ancient China, wealthy officials burned specific incense in their robes before dressing so the fabric itself would carry a signature scent into any room they entered. Today, we'd call that a signature fragrance. The concept is completely unchanged. And this is where ancient wealth starts to feel uncomfortably familiar. The wealthy ancient human was not so different from the wealthy modern human. The tools have changed. The psychology has not. Consider the Roman practice of building absurdly large tombs. The wealthy didn't just want to be remembered after death. They wanted to dominate the landscape even from the grave. Some tombs along the roads outside Rome were so large, they functioned as landmarks. Travelers used them for navigation. They were, in the most literal sense, impossible to ignore. Today, that's a skyscraper with your name on it in gold letters 40 feet high. Or consider the ancient Chinese practice of burying the wealthy with full sets of miniature servants, soldiers, horses, and houses made from clay or bronze. The belief was partly spiritual, that these objects would serve the deceased in the afterlife. But there was also a social logic to it. Your burial goods told everyone who dug you up, thousands of years later, exactly how important you had been. Death was just another opportunity to demonstrate rank. The rich have always found creative ways to be rich even after they've stopped being alive. In ancient Mesopotamia, wealthy merchants signed their contracts with personal cylinder seals, small stone rollers carved with unique images that, when pressed into clay, left an unmistakable personal signature. Some of these seals were made from imported lapis lazuli, a deep blue stone that had to travel thousands of miles from Afghanistan to reach Babylon. The seal itself was a statement. Yes, I signed this contract. Also, I can afford Afghan lapis lazuli. Also, I know people who know people. The document and the flex happened simultaneously. Today, we call that a luxury business card on thick cardstock with a matte finish. The ancient wealthy also ate differently from everyone else. Not just better food, stranger food. In Rome, the ideal dinner party was an event called a convivium. a word that literally means living together, and these could go on for hours. The wealthy competed to serve the most unusual, the most expensive, and the most geographically distant ingredients they could find. Dormice fattened in clay pots and seasoned with honey and poppy seeds, flamingo tongue, sea urchins shipped packed in snow from the mountains, ostriches, whole peacocks roasted and then reassembled with their feathers reattached so they looked alive again at the table. That last detail says everything. You could eat a peacock. But the truly wealthy served it looking exactly like it did before it died, because simply eating the expensive thing was not impressive enough. You had to make the expensive thing perform as well. If you can afford to make a dead bird look alive again at dinner, you're probably going to make a dead bird look alive again at dinner. The Roman writer Petronius, satirizing exactly this culture, described a fictional wealthy host who served his guests a dish made to look like one thing, but taste like another. Roasted pork carved into the shapes of fish and birds, just to prove that his cook could do it. The point was not flavor. The point was skill as spectacle. The food was a demonstration of what money could command. Today, we call that a tasting menu at a restaurant where there are no prices on the menu. But beneath all of this, something else was happening. Something that the theatrical meals and the enormous tombs and the scented robes and the carried litters were all, in their own way, trying to answer. The ancient wealthy were terrified, not of poverty. Most of them were far enough from the bottom that a single bad harvest wouldn't destroy them. The fear was something older and harder to name. It was the fear that none of it meant anything, that all the silver and the slaves and the silk and the painted ceilings were just arrangements of objects in a world that did not fundamentally care about them. Wealth in the ancient world came with very little of what we might call security. There was no insurance. There was no stable government guarantee protecting your property. In Rome, your estate could be seized if you fell out of political favor. In ancient China, a change in dynasty could wipe out entire noble families overnight. In Egypt, the wrong pharaoh could redistribute everything you owned. The wealthy ancient human was not sitting comfortably at the top of a stable system. He was balancing on top of a structure that had collapsed for people just like him many times in living memory. So they built. They donated temples. They funded public baths and roads and festivals that bore their names. They commissioned portraits and statues of themselves placed in public squares. They wrote their names into stone, because stone lasts longer than memory, and memory is the only immortality available without a functioning afterlife mythology to lean on. And even then, you weren't completely sure. The performance of wealth was not just status competition. It was also a defense against the particular terror of the wealthy person. The fear that when you are gone, the world will simply forget you were ever there. The tombstones, the litters, the wig towers, the peacocks reassembled with their feathers. All of it was the ancient human answer to the same question every generation of wealthy people has quietly asked themselves while lying awake in expensive sheets in a well-appointed room. Was any of this real? Did I matter? The Roman poet Horace wrote, in the 1st century BC, that you should seize the day because tomorrow is uncertain. He was not writing as a peasant worried about survival. He was writing as a man who had seen wealthy patrons lose everything and understood that comfort had never been the same thing as safety. Even at the top, especially at the top, the ancient human could feel the ground moving. Walk through any ancient site today, Rome, Athens, Babylon, Luxor. The columns that are still standing, the foundations that have survived 2,000 years of weather and war and indifference. almost none of it was built by average people. Average people left almost nothing behind because they never had the resources to leave anything that would last. What survives is wealth. Its artifacts, its architecture, its insistence on being remembered, and yet the people who built it are gone just as completely as the people who owned nothing. Marcus, with his silk and his clients and his grain ships, is exactly as absent from the world as the man who carried his litter. The wig is in a museum. The head it sat on is dust. The desperate, anxious, very human drive to matter, to be seen, to be remembered, to prove through objects and performances and monuments that your presence in the world had weight. It didn't save anyone. It never does. But it left us something remarkable, a record, not of greatness, but of recognition, that somewhere inside every wealthy ancient human, behind the silk and the spectacle, there was someone who looked up at the ceiling they had paid to have painted and felt, very quietly, the exact same thing you have felt, that being here is strange and brief, and that you would give almost anything to make it mean something,